meaningful progress on the commitments that Associate Attorney General Gupta announced in June 22 around the enforcement of Title VI and the Safe Streets Act. I'd also like to, and I'm going on and on, but I'm taking my time. I also like an update on when the department will respond to the Oversight Committee Democrats' letter from June 2021 about the memo issued by the Trump administration's Office of Legal Counsel concerning the Equal Rights Amendment. That deeply flawed memo is preventing the Archivist of the United States from publishing the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th Amendment. I know that OLC issued a short clarification after you took office, but the wording was not a clear repudiation of the Trump-era memo. I urge you to fully withdraw the Trump OLC memo, which is baselessly obstructing constitutional gender equality for all. Finally, I cannot overstate how shocked I am by the targeting of protesters who oppose the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, or Cop City, and I urge the department to investigate these obvious violations of civil rights. These may all seem like unrelated issues, but to me, to my constituents, to countless advocates, and to people who are most directly impacted, they are interconnected, and they all speak to whether the department under your leadership will advance justice or simply pay lip service to it. Given the limited time that we have, I don't expect you to comment on all of these issues, but I have a question. Will you commit to working with me in my office on these issues, including having your staff promptly, by writing your position and sending that to us, reaching out to us about all of the issues that we just spoke about?
I'd be happy to have Office of Legislative Affairs work with your staff. I want to say I could not be prouder of the civil rights record of this department. It is the fundamental basis for why the Justice Department was founded. We have a history of also being obviously involved in the 1960s. When I came to the Justice Department.
I'm going to stop you. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from, the things that I would like to see. I don't mean to cut you off, but I need to reclaim my time. Finally, I want to remind everyone yet again that this is what good faith oversight looks like, not the Republican playbook of running interference for a twice impeached, 4 times indicted white supremacist demagogue who would rather overthrow our democracy than admit he lost an election. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank the Attorney General for being here before us today. On October 21st, 2021, before this committee, I asked you about Mr. Scott Smith, a father in Loudoun County, Virginia, who was arrested at a school board meeting where he questioned the rape of his daughter in a bathroom in the public school there. You said at the time you were unfamiliar with the case. Are you now? Yes or no?
Only familiar to the extent I've read about it in the press.
You sent a memo on October 4th, 2021, directing the FBI and U.S. Attorney offices to address, quote, harassment, end quote, of school boards. Yes or no?
Sent a memo to address violence and threats of violence in connection with school personnel.
Directed at school boards.
Not directed at school boards, directed at school personnel, school administrators.
Throughout the country as a priority for the federal government, for the United States Attorney's Office. That followed a letter on September 29th, 2021 from the National School Board Association to President Biden and emails from the National School Board Association Director Chip Slavin to the White House, in which the White House asked for specific threats. And one of the examples was Scott Smith. Subsequent to our hearing 2 years ago, 26 states left the National School Board Association, and Slavin resigned on November 23rd of 2021. Last week, Mr. Smith was pardoned by Governor Youngkin. Do you think the governor was correct? Yes or no?
Pardon authority belongs to the governor.
You don't have an opinion on whether the governor was correct?
I don't know the facts of the case, so I'm not in a position to make.
Have you rescinded the memo that you issued in 2021? Yes or no?
What we're discussing.
Have you rescinded the memo? Yes or no?
What we're discussing here occurs.
Does the memo still exist? Is it still going? Yes or no? Has it been rescinded?
The memo was intended to have meetings within 30 days.
Has it been rescinded?
The 30 days have finished. Nothing has happened in more than a year and a half with respect to that.
But it has not been rescinded. It has not been pulled back.
To rescind.
Despite evidence that has come out from the National School Board Association commissioned report that White House officials discussed this with DOJ more than a week before the letter was sent, the NSBA apologized. Have you apologized? Yes or no?
I've testified 7 times since that original memo.
What's the first time you're back here since we talked about it?
I'm sorry?
It's the first time you're back here in front of us. Have you apologized for putting that memo out that implicated Scott Smith as a domestic terrorist, something the governor of Virginia has now pardoned him from all of these accusations?
The memo said nothing about him, nothing about parents being terrorists, nothing about attending school
So
boards.
the answer is it's not been rescinded and you haven't apologized for it.
The answer is that's not an
labeling an American citizen a domestic terrorist in a memo and referring to it and a memo that's built on the back of that. But now we had this compliments being driven to the Civil Rights Division. Let's talk about Mark Houck in Pennsylvania, a father who was arrested with heavily armed federal and local law enforcement in front of his wife and children. This after Mark Houck's lawyers had said he would appear voluntarily. Local authorities investigated, found no case. Mark Houck was arrested by the FBI for FACE Act violations. The jury met for an hour. Houck was acquitted. Now, when I was in federal court, I don't remember that being my result very often. In fact, I don't remember happening at all, where we took it to a jury and it was acquitted after an hour. Did you investigate this or question the United States attorney why they wasted resources for such an obvious result? And can you explain, yes or no, that that was a good use of the Department of Justice's authority?
The Justice Department respects the jury's verdict. The decisions in that case were made by agents and prosecutors on the ground.
Are you concerned that enforcement of the FACE Act has been biased towards pro-lifers over anti-life protesters, 126-4 by our count? And we're asking information to be able to track down the information of such prosecutions, but 126 times against pro-lifers versus 4 times for people who dare to question the issue of life. I'll leave that out there just to say that is the Civil Rights Division at play. Meanwhile, we've got the very liberal progressive groups being targeted as well. Senator Cruz and I sent a letter to you asking for information about how the FBI informant had gone to a liberal group's pro-life meeting, and yet we didn't get any response from you. So I'd ask if you would respond to our letter that we sent back in March asking about FBI infiltrating such a meeting.
I don't know what you're referring to, but I will ask the Office of Legislative Affairs to look into this letter.
Thank you. Finally, our tax cases require approval by Main Justice no matter what district has venue, yes or no? Do tax cases as a general matter require approval by Main Justice no matter what district has venue, yes or no?
It depends on the circumstances in the example that I know you're referring to.
Generally speaking, yes.
Not
Since Main Justice runs tax division, yes or no? Main Justice runs the tax division.
in the Hunter Biden case, I assured Mr. Weiss.
That's not what I'm asking about. I didn't ask you. I haven't mentioned that guy's name. I didn't. I very simply asked a very simple question. Okay. Do tax cases require approval by Main Justice? As a general matter?
Most of the time, but not when the Attorney General has granted authority to a U.S. attorney to do what he thinks is best.
And in a turf battle, a tax division
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
I mean, I recall my colleague having a minute and a half of additional time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Attorney General Garland, thank you first and foremost for your public service and your dedication to justice. I'm delighted to see you here today. Thank you for appearing before us. I represent El Paso, Texas, a community right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And so we have been witnessing firsthand the abuses at the hands of Governor Greg Abbott through Operation Lone Star, which began in 2021. Governor Abbott has deployed state resources and Texas National Guards members to the state's border with Mexico. And Operation Lone Star has created border management challenges. It's resulted in countless humanitarian and due process violations for migrants. It's harmed guardsmen assigned to the mission. It's cost the state billions of dollars, and it has completely undermined the federal government's authority over immigration. I sent you a letter, my colleagues and I from Democratic colleagues from Texas sent you a letter in July about Abbott's floating barriers. I know that that case is going through appeal, but we have also learned that the National Guard a guardsman shot at a Mexican national across the Rio Grande. And in September, on September 1st, I sent you a letter asking that the DOJ investigate that. We also know that Governor Abbott, we've learned from whistleblowers that he has ordered National Guardsmen to prevent migrants from turning themselves in to CBP, has even ordered that they push people back into Mexico. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to unanimous consent to enter into the record an El Paso Times article from earlier this week. Texas National Guard orders hundreds of asylum seekers on U.S. territory back into Mexico.
Without objection.
This, in addition to Governor Abbott separating fathers from their children and their families, it's egregious what is happening on the border via Operation Lone Star. Attorney General Garland, are you able to speak to any responses the department has had to Governor Abbott's blatant undermining of federal immigration authority?
I can obviously speak on the boys question. When we brought suit under the Rivers and Harbors Act for the interference with navigable waters, that case is still under adjudication in the district court.
I understand that. There are other issues, and want to make sure I flag them for you today at this hearing, but would also like for your folks to take a close look at the investigation that I've requested. And I will be sending a follow-up letter after what we've learned just this week from the El Paso Times.
Thank you.
Switching gears, I do want to offer you an opportunity for some rebuttal, because what we've seen from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is their penchant for performance for Twitter and for other news programs. Mr. Attorney General, we've heard a lot of accusations regarding some U.S. attorneys' offices not partnering with Mr. Weiss and hypotheticals about what that means. Can you please explain the difference between partnering with a U.S. attorney's office and acting as a special attorney or special counsel?
I can talk about it, obviously, in the abstract and the theoretical. It's a normal process of the department. If prosecutors from one area of the country and has a case that has significance in another, to speak with the U.S. attorney in the other district, find out what the policies of the district are, to find out what the practices are, to see how judges in that district react to different kinds of charges. Sometimes decision is made to partner together in those investigations, and sometimes a decision is made for the U.S. attorney from the other district to have his or her own people bring those cases. I have personally been involved in, I think, 3 those cases during the period when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. And over my entire career, I have been given 515 authority twice myself for this purpose. It is not it is just a mechanical question of what courts require in order to make an appearance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garland. Again, appreciate your public service to the American people. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Garland, for being here today. Every time I'm in my district, constituents are concerned about the weaponization of government, them being selected because they happen to be conservatives. And I think on your watch now, the DOJ actually is a mid-30% approval rating. And, you know, every time the DOJ goes after Trump, he goes up in the polls. I think the American people are starting to wake up to what's going on, and I think it's fairly obvious. And the first question I have is, I understand now that we know that thanks to an FBI whistleblower, that the FBI received information on Americans from Bank of America. Specifically, Bank of America sent the FBI a list of customers who made transactions in the days on and around January 6, 2021. My question for you is, did the Department of Justice acquire any geolocation data from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, did you say locational data?
Geolocational data.
Geolocational, I believe everything that was done with respect to geolocational data was disclosed in the public filings in the January 6 cases. I don't have that at my fingertips, but this is a matter of public record.
Do you remember any specific analyses that you may have done with that data?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Any specific analyses that you may have gotten from that data? Was there anything particular you were looking for, Mr. Attorney General? Like, did they exercise their rights? Did they maybe buy a firearm?
I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the second thing. The purpose, as I understood of the location data, was to determine whether people who claim they weren't inside the Capitol actually were inside the Capitol.
Well, where did the, I guess the question is, to your knowledge, and where the DOJ, geolocation data from external sources, entities, or organizations, to your knowledge, did you receive that from external sources, or are you buying that data?
So I don't know the exact answer in general, but I believe with respect to January 6th, these were the results of subpoena as issued to telephone companies.
So you subpoenaed the telephone companies and they got the data?
Well,
from
they
outside
require, this
sources?
requires orders authorized by the court.
Does it concern you that, we talked about Durham's report earlier, that he said that the FBI's activities were somewhat sobering? Does that worry you on your watch, that the activities of the FBI have been called sobering now?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Who calls it sobering?
John Durham in his report. Did you read his report?
I'm sorry, who?
John
Oh,
Durham.
Durham?
Yes, sir.
I did read the report. All those events had to do with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Is that what
That
you're
was part of
referring
it,
to?
yes, sir.
Yes.
Were you concerned when he said it was sobering what the FBI was doing?
Look, I think Mr. Durham, and I just want to make sure everybody understands, Mr. Durham thanked me for not interfering with his investigation. I had promised he would be able to go forward without interference, just as I promised Mr. Weiss. Mr. Durham's, and I did not interfere with his report. His report reported a lack of analytical rigor and a number of other problems with respect to the investigation. I think both the Inspector General made a similar comments and Director Wray has made the same.
Thank you, Attorney General. I don't have a whole lot of time. I want to yield a little bit to the chairman, but is it a crime in the U.S. to question an election?
I'm sorry.
Is it a crime in the U.S. to question an election? Is that a crime?
I'm sorry. It's my fault. I can't hear. To request a what?
Is it a crime to question an election in the United States of America? It is a crime. Is it a crime for the U.S. citizens to say, we want to ask about this election, we want to question this election, we actually want to look into the election? Is that a crime when citizens just question an election in America now?
Again, I think you're asking not a hypothetical, but something specific about the specific.
I think that's just general. I don't think that's specific. Elections have been questioned for decades past. Is that now a crime in America?
Did you say to ask questions about an election? Is that what
To
you said?
question an election.
The question,
Just to question the
it's not
results.
it's not a crime to question an election.
Because I questioned the election results in 2020. And there are a lot of people in America that do. And they question the weaponization of government attacking American citizens. And so you, sir, have an issue with trustworthiness of the American people and with Congress at this point. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'll yield 36 seconds.
No problem. Mr. Garland, did you consider, I just want to go back to this question, did you consider anyone else when David Weiss requested special counsel designation on August 8th?
No, Mr. Weiss asked to be made special counsel, and I did not consider an alternative. Of course, to have put in an alternative would have greatly disrupted an investigation that was already
I want to
ongoing.
be clear, he was the only one under consideration. It was either no special counsel, or if there was a special counsel, it was going to be the guy who presided over the investigation for the previous 5 years.
I thought about the possibility, what the consequences would be, both of not appointing him and trying to find somebody else at that time, but there was no other.
You had no concerns. I mean, the whistleblowers have brought forward all kinds of concerns. Earlier, when someone brought those up, you said, well, those are allegations. I think they stand up well. They've been cross-examined for 4 hours by Democrats in the Oversight Committee. But there were two facts that can be questioned. Two facts about the investigation to Hunter Biden. Fact number one, they let the statute of limitations run. They let it expire. And fact number two, the plea deal fell apart. So I just wanted to make clear that the guy who presided over all that was the only guy under consideration for special counsel designation. Is that right?
Mr. Weiss is a person known for high integrity, for great experience in the prosecutorial realm, and he was appointed by the president.
You can, that's fine. You can see how that,
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying there.
I have no doubts about his abilities in this
He
area.
was the only one under consideration.
The question was whether to appoint someone. And I thought, I will say, what the consequences would be of trying to switch horses in midstream, but I did not consider any other
Okay,
person.
on July 10th,
No.
he wrote Senator Graham and he said, I've had discussions with departmental officials. He said, I haven't sought special counsel status, but I've had discussions with departmental officials. Who, and I don't know if this asked earlier, who did he talk with then?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the letter that he sent to?
Senator Graham on July 10th.
Again, I'm not going to get into internal deliberations of the Justice Department.
Okay, fine. Is there one person though, who's like the point person at the Justice Department for David Weiss as he now is functioning as a special counsel in this investigation?
Mr. Weiss is now subject to the special counsel regulations, which require urgent reporting under certain circumstances, require him to consult with numerous places within the Justice Department.
Fine, you're following the statute. God bless
Yeah.
you. That's where it's supposed to happen. But you said there's reporting. Who does he report to?
Again, I'm not going to get into
Is
these.
it you?
I'm ultimately responsible.
Is it the DAG?
Mr. Weiss did not have to report to anybody. He was the supervisor and decision maker in these matters.
Okay.
Wow, he really doesn't
we
want to
have
take
votes
any
on the floor.
responsibility at all, does he?
We have to take another break, Mr. Attorney General. We'll get back here as quick as we can, and we'll start with the Democrats.
Sure.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm sorry I had a glitch up with some of my programs, so thank you guys for being here. But let's see. He's still sidestepping the questions. So sorry, Pappy Frost, Hellcat. So sorry. Let me make sure everything's still working over on Hill. Yes, you guys, thank you so much for being here. Liana says Trump is telling them to turn the music up. Helen Dixon says have to hide. Everything can't have someone new stumbling onto anything incriminating. That's right. Liana says looks like Trump is speaking in the school gym or something from the camera angles. Yeah. No, this is. Let's see. We gotta. We may cover. I don't think like we're gonna cover any of the Trump rallies just because a lot of other people are covering them, and I don't want to take away from, I don't want to take much away from other streamers. So we're just gonna cover these things, these little congressional things. Let's see. I don't know. I wonder if my stream got disrupted everywhere. I think it did. Thank you guys for being here, though. Really appreciate you. Let's see. Please like and share this out. And again, you guys can take out our website, takingbacktexas.org. Yes, Donda says, look how dumb and deaf he looks. Why does he seem to hear everything the Dems are saying about him? Right? Sorry about the feed drop, you guys. Thank you guys for being here. Let's see. I'll take a small break. I'm just about to eat something, so we'll be back in probably about 5 minutes. They don't take very long breaks here. They're a little bit better about it than the people at the Paxton trial. They would say, we'll take a 10-minute break. It'd be a 45-minute break. All right, you guys. So this is just Attorney General Garland testifying, on his role in in kind of deconstructing oversight structures that we have in place. He's not doing anything. So, and we see him continuously deferring to Weiss. And so what that says to me is that, and he's deferring to Weiss, who's responsible for conducting specific investigations. And Paxton said, Garland said, "Oh, I promised I wouldn't look into that. Promised I wouldn't look into that." All of those things, right? We heard him say that over and over. He's the head of the DOJ. So when someone is investigating something that the DOJ should have purview over. He does need to look into it. He doesn't, some things you can't totally recuse yourself of. Like, I know we're mad at Barr, but remember when Barr wouldn't recuse himself from the investigations that were going on? He was like, no, it's literally my job. I'm not going to recuse myself. You know, so now this guy is over here acting like, I can't look into that. First of all, I promise I can't look into that. And I can't look into that because, you know, but the real reason is because he wants to reserve the right to throw the entire investigation under the bus. And if he looks into it while it's happening, he'll be privy to some of the items that he's going to later have to act shocked and appalled about. So that's why he's not looking into it, because he's waiting to look into it until they've got a proper narrative framed. So that's why they're just absorbing all of the information about it, not doing anything about it, because what they're doing is rearranging it into a narrative. Instead of prosecuting the clear violations of the law, they're rearranging all of the facts, it seems like. This is just what people are saying on the street, that they're collecting all the information, right? Pretending to do an investigation, but they're actually just sort of rearranging the facts so that they can build a narrative around it to sort of debunk it. You know what I mean? So over on the Rumble chat, Peppy Frost says, Rumble stream is screwy. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Madeline is a professional projection artist. They always accuse others of exactly what they are doing. Absolutely. Someone says Pianon is 30 to 60 minutes behind your stream. And that's okay. Yeah, other people can stream this too. This is live. I'm streaming it straight from the live stream from C-SPAN. So, and I've got some commentary because the exact legislation that we're working on at Taking Back Texas, it deals with this exact thing where we need to bind these executive agencies to the will of a duly elected legislature. So we train people, you know, all the way down to poll watchers. It's poll watcher training, but honestly, it's more election security training for citizen investigators. Okay, to show you how to keep the local government and state government and federal government in check, at least as far as it comes to, at least as far as elections go, so that, you know, if they can sway that one thing, then they can do whatever they want anywhere, and we won't be able to stop them, because they're going to tell us, well, you voted for it. And if they're successful in surgically removing the provisions of the law or authorizing the waiving of the law that allows us to properly audit, if they're successful in that, then we won't even be able to prove what they're doing. We'll just know it, but they'll be covering their tracks, and we'll have given them everything they needed to do it, you know? So, hey, what's up, Sparky? Sparky says over on Pilled that Trump was mentioned more times by the Dems. If it was a drinking game, we'd all be dead of alcohol poisoning. Uh-huh. I agree with you. So that's why we do what we do. So we'll have another few trainings out soon. We'll be announcing some of that. But go check out our website, takingbacktexas.org. Donations are appreciated, but they're not required. And thank you very much. Yes, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General of the United States, says that the theories around the Biden family corruption, is not based in reality. He established that. He established that he basically he's not looked into the investigation into the Bidens at all, and he's sort of pretending like that's for some sort of integrity reasons. In this hearing, the Democrats have accused the Republicans of wanting to defund the police and not backing law enforcement. They've accused the Republicans of pretending to back law enforcement because we want investigations into the FBI's handling of very serious reports. And they've in this hearing, the Democrats have attempted to assume the position of protectors of election security, which we know that they'll do that every now and then, but it's funny. It's always funny. Every time they do that, it's funny. It doesn't get old, actually. It doesn't. They get old, but the jokes are, it's still pretty funny. We need to be able to laugh about it. We need to be able to see it for what it is. It's a joke, you know. So thank you guys for being here on Foxhole and Pilled and YouTube and Rumble. And we will be back in just a few minutes.
face-saving indictment last week of Hunter Biden, everyone knows the fix is in. 4.5 years. 4.5 years, the Department of Justice has been investigating Mr. Biden, an investigation run by David Weiss, an investigation that limited the number of witnesses agents could interview, an investigation that prohibited agents from referring to the president as the, quote, big guy in any of the interviews they did get to do, an investigation that curtailed attempts to interview Mr. Biden by giving the transit team secret a heads up, an investigation that notified Mr. Biden's defense counsel about a pending search warrant, an investigation run by Mr. Weiss, where they told the Congress 3 different stories in 33 days. They told this committee on June 7th, David Weiss said, I have ultimate authority to determine when, where, and whether to bring charges. 23 days later, June 30th, he told this committee, actually, I can only bring charges in my U.S. Attorney's District, the District of Delaware. And then to further confuse matters, on July 10th, he told Senator Graham, I have not sought special counsel status. Rather, I've had discussions with the Department of Justice. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that negotiated a plea deal that the federal district court declined to accept. A plea deal so ridiculous, the judge asked this question, quote, is there any precedence for agreeing not to prosecute crimes that have nothing to do with the charges being diverted? The response from the DOJ lawyer, I'm not aware of any, Your Honor. A plea deal so ridiculous that the judge also asked, have you ever seen a diversion agreement where the agreement not to prosecute was so broad that it encompasses crimes in a different case? The response from the DOJ lawyer, no, Your Honor, we haven't. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that not only had a sweetheart deal rejected, but according to the New York Times, there was an even sweeter deal, an earlier deal, a deal in which Mr. Biden would not have to plead guilty to anything. 4.5 years and all that, and now we get a special counsel. Now we get a special counsel, and who does the Attorney General pick? David Weiss, the guy who let all that happen. He could have selected anyone. He could have picked anyone inside government, outside government. He could have picked former attorney generals, former special counsels, but he picks the one guy he knows will protect Joe Biden. He picks David Weiss. And here's what the AG said in his August 11th announcement of David Weiss as a special counsel. Quote, I am confident that Mr. Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner. Urgent manner, every witness we've talked to, the 2 FBI whistleblowers that came forward, Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, the 2 FBI agents on the case, Mr. Sobocinski, Ms. Hawley, they've all said this thing was anything but urgent. The FBI said they were frustrated at the pace. Ms. Hawley said she was frustrated at the pace. And of course, the IRS agents, they said the investigation was slow-walked and even-handed. They limited the number of witnesses that could be interviewed. They tipped off the defense counsel about a subpoena. The judge says the plea deal was a joke. And all that's just half the story. There's one investigation protecting President Biden. There's another one attacking President Trump. Justice Department's got both sides of the equation covered. Look at the classified documents case. Spring and early summer of last year, the Department of Justice asked President Trump to turn over boxes of documents. He does just that. In the process, President Trump finds 38 additional documents. He tells the Department of Justice, very next day the FBI comes to his home and he turns them over. Then the Department of Justice asked the president to put any boxes he brought from the White House to his home in his storage room and secure it by locking it. He does that as well. Everything they asked him to do, he did. And then what's the Justice Department do? August 8th, last year, they raid President Trump's home. And according to the FBI agent, Stephen D'Antuono, the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office, the search was a complete departure from standard protocol. When we interviewed Mr. D'Antuono, he said, first, the Miami field office didn't do the search. Instead, they sent folks from D.C. He said there was no U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Instead, it was run by D.C., in particular Jay Bratt, who's now on the special counsel team. He said the FBI didn't get President Trump's counsel's approval before they did the search. And then Mr. D'Antuono told us he had recommended that when the FBI got to Mr. Trump's home, President Trump's home, they contact his counsel, wait for him to get there and do the search together. Of course, the DOJ said no. And then who does the Attorney General name as special counsel in that case? Jack Smith, the guy who a few years ago was looking for ways to prosecute Americans, targeted by Lois Lerner and the IRS, looking to prosecute the very victims of the weaponized government, the weaponized IRS. Jack Smith, the guy who prosecuted
Any
Governor
of this
McDonald,
sounding
only to
familiar?
have the Supreme Court overturn that prosecution in a unanimous decision. That's the guy that the Attorney General of the United States selects as special counsel. And you wonder why 4 out of 5 Americans believe there are now 2 standards of justice in our great country. Mr. Garland, I anticipate a number of questions on these 2 investigations. Later in the hearing, I expect from Republicans, you will also get questions about the many other concerns the American people have with the department. The school board's memorandum, treating Catholics, the memo that said pro-life Catholics are extremists, the Fifth Circuit decision, great decision, on the Department of Justice and other agencies censoring American speech, and of course the FISA law that's up for reauthorization this year, and how that process has been abused and infringed on the rights, privacy rights of the American people. Americans believe that today in our country, there is unequal application of the law. They believe that because there is. Republicans are committed to making that change. With that, I would yield to the gentleman from New York, the ranking member, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, at the outset, let me make 2 comments. One, just about every assertion you made in your opening statement has been completely refuted by witnesses who have testified before this committee. 2, far from being favored, many commentators have noted that people accused of simple gun possession while under the influence of a drug, when that gun was not used in the commission of a crime, are rarely, if ever, prosecuted the way Hunter Biden is being prosecuted. Mr. Chairman, one of this committee's most important duties is conducting oversight of the Department of Justice. We are called upon to ensure that the DOJ uses the enormous amount of power it is granted in a fair, just manner that respects the civil and human rights of all Americans. The Attorney General of the United States oversees issues that affect the lives of each and every American. Violent crime, drug trafficking, attacks on our civil rights, threats to our national security, and environmental crimes all fall under his purview. That is why we regularly request that he or she appear before this committee to speak about the work the department is doing for the welfare of the country. This is how we ensure that the department stays accountable to the American people. But if we're up
Office's policy, if somebody said, we're going to get up to 2,000 people on a particular crime. Is that consistent with your policy?
I think what that U.S. Attorney was referring to was a prediction for how many more cases would still be brought, because the court had asked how many more people have
You filed the letter with the
identified.
court saying that we're looking at upwards of 2,000. We've got 1,200 more that we think we're going to get. So you don't do that for anything else, right? So you don't have anything like tax fraud. You're not saying, okay, we're going to have so many people that we want to get for tax fraud, so many people we want to get for
We don't
lying on
have
federal firearms
quotas. If a
application.
court asks us what the likely workload will be based on prosecutions and investigations that are pending, the U.S. Attorney is obligated to respond.
Did you guys provide any reference of the number of people you thought you would prosecute who were involved in the 2020 summer riots of the burning of the Portland courthouse while there were still people inside those courthouses? You didn't ever file with the court or anything, say, oh, we think we're going to have another 300, 400, whatever it may be, because you didn't file those charges, did you?
I'm sorry, I'm not following. I believe that
I'm sure you're not.
The number that you're asking about was.
Let me ask you this question.
Objection that the court had asked the U.S.
let's-
Attorney to make.
Let's switch topics. Maybe this one be easier to follow, I suppose. Is it the policy of the DOJ to provide advance notice to subjects before conducting a search for evidence?
It totally depends on the circumstance.
If the circumstance were that you had a guest house where the U.S. Attorney, Deputy U.S. Attorney saying, well, we know that we suspect there's a lot of evidence there, but we're not gonna really follow that up. And calls the attorney from the other side saying, we were gonna do a search warrant. Would that be consistent with your policy?
Okay, again, I know this is no hypothetical, and I don't know the facts of this case, and I don't know what happened. And I believe the events you're talking about, as reported in the press, occurred under the previous administration. So
No, that event didn't happen in the previous administration. Let's talk about that. I mean, you keep saying this happened in the previous administration, but let's talk about this for just a moment. You keep saying, I don't know what happened there, but I'm going to opine when it happened. You see the fallacy of that, the inconsistencies? I don't know when it happened. I don't know what happened because I'm not involved, but it happened under the previous administration. That's so logically fallacious.
I'm sorry, I'm not following what's.
Yeah, I know you're not
fallacious about
following.
it.
So the question is, you've got one of your deputy U.S. attorneys calling the attorney on this side saying, look, we're going to go to these two places, probably go in the next couple of days. And of course, then ultimately the search warrant is called off. I just want to know, is it consistent to call up people and where you know that they've got boxes of information, or you suspect they have boxes of information? That's why you got the warrant. That's why you're going to go look. And you give them a heads up so they can move those boxes of information. Would that be consistent with DOJ policy?
I'm just going to say again, you're asking me actually to comment about allegations in a particular case about.
No, I'm not. I'm asking you, is that consistent with your overall policy? Forget Delaware and what they did and that they actually did that. Let's just talk about generic policy.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking about Mar-a-Lago. I may not have understood then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, la-di-da. So when we're talking about this, when we're talking about your general policy, is it your policy? Is that acceptable when you suspect that there are movable items to call up and say, we're gonna be there to look?
Yeah, there's no policy on this question. The strategy and tactics to be used to preserve evidence are left up to the investigators and offices on the ground. Sometimes it would be a serious mistake to call up. Sometimes
here once again, you don't know what happened in the Hunter Biden case because that's somebody else is doing it. But you can be sure of the timing of when all this took place. That is one of the biggest oddities of your testimony today. I yield back to the gentleman from Colorado.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you for your decades of faithful service to our country, to our Constitution, and to the rule of law. Thank you for putting up with this today. The American people are watching. They know what's going on here. This is a gross misuse of your time, your team's time, and our time. It is a shameful circus. It has a goal. The goal is to spew lies and disinformation, ultimately to tear away at the confidence of our independent institutions, in your case today, our very important Department of Justice. That's the exact MO of a former president. Tear away at the confidence of our independent institutions, whether it's our electoral system, the Department of Justice, the judiciary, and independent news media. The American people are watching this sham. But it's not just a circus, it's dangerous, and you know that, and you have mentioned that. I believe that these fictions and fantasies are dangerous. Dangerous for you and the 115,000 public servants with whom you work. Dangerous for national security. Dangerous for communities' security. Dangerous for the rule of law and our Constitution. All at the same time of a looming shutdown. The other side of the aisle cannot govern. And so they have this hearing, which was supposed to be oversight, and use it as a big distraction because they are failing to govern. Imagine if we go into a shutdown. What does that say to your members of your department? What does it say to our service members, U.S. troops who would be training, fighting without pay and without confidence in this country's governing ability? It's a great distraction. So let me pivot to something I care about, and I know you and your department cares about. It is Recovery Month. And for families like mine with a member in recovery, every month is Recovery Month. So I thank you for what you are doing on the fentanyl crisis, the overdose crisis that has claimed 110,000 lives in a single 12-month period. 300 souls a day, every day. Souls who have died while we were in this hearing, every day. What is the department doing to combat the trafficking, to combat the amount of fentanyl on the ground? As DEA has said, there's enough fentanyl on the ground right now to kill this entire population multiple times over. Tell us about your important work in fentanyl.
Well, Congresswoman, let me begin by saying I share your personal concern and grief over this. I have met with the families of children, teenagers, of elderly people who have become addicted to fentanyl and who have died from fentanyl. Everything you're saying is correct, and it's a catastrophe for the country. So as a consequence, the Justice Department has poured its resources, particularly from DEA, with FBI assistance as well, and with fugitive arrests by the Marshal Service and with gun tracing by the ATF, into the entire process by which fentanyl reaches the United States. So we have sanctioned the precursor companies in China. We have indicted some of them for their violations. We have arrested some as far off as in Fiji and brought them back to the United States. We have traced these precursors to Mexico, where they are made into the fentanyl pills. Fentanyl costs about 10 cents to make. It can be sold on the street in the United States between $10 and $30. You can see what the enormous profit motive is here. So we must stop the cartels themselves. I have, as I said, traveled to Mexico twice in order to work with our counterparts in the military and law enforcement there.
I thank you for all of that. I want to just pivot once, and I want to do anything I can to partner with you on this issue so that we stop losing people. I traveled recently with the Foreign Affairs Committee to The Hague, met with the extraordinary folks, the top prosecutor and his able team. They were very complimentary of the Department of Justice and your work. Can you tell us about your important role, or America's important role, in war crimes, especially in light of your powerful history?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I've traveled to Ukraine twice and to meet with the prosecutor general there. And I'm going to meet with him again this week here. And he's met with me several times here. The Justice Department is pursuing the war crimes from Russia's unlawful and unjust invasion of Ukraine, to help to investigate war crimes over which we have jurisdiction, to help the Prosecutor General in Ukraine investigate those prosecutions. I was, I believe, the first cabinet member ever to visit The Hague, the International Criminal Court of Justice, and to meet with Karim Khan, who is chief prosecutor, to talk about our cooperation in respect to the investigations that they are doing. I've assigned a Justice Department prosecutor to the investigatory body that's been set up in The Hague for the crime of aggression. And she is there now working with the ICC and with Europol and Eurojust. And I've assigned a prosecutor to our embassy in Kyiv to work with our ambassador there and to work with the Prosecutor General's office there.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing that answer to go on, because it is critically important. America is indispensable, and your work is indispensable. Thank you, sir.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Attorney General, do you support the consent decree that I believe was put in place in the city of Minneapolis?
And I'm sorry, do I support the,
Do you support the consent decree that was put in place with the police department of
the
Minneapolis?
one was put in place by the federal government? Yes.
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 Do you support fewer cops on the street?
Do I support?
Fewer cops
No.
on the street?
No, I don't support fewer cops on the streets.
That's what's happening as a result
It's
of
not, I
what's
don't
happening.
think that's a consequence of the consent decree.
Do you support-
Minneapolis has been losing police officers for many years.
Yeah,
and
do you support more crime?
do I support more crime?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
So there was just a hearing in Minnetonka, Minnesota, a Tony suburb of Minneapolis, just I think this last week, where they're beside themselves with the amount of crime that continues in Minneapolis since the riots of 2020. And I would point out to you that I had an officer in my district. I lived right across the border in Wisconsin, or that's where my district begins. A police officer was shot to death as a result of a weak on crime prosecutor in St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Guy served only 4 years for a violent crime. Do you think that that's a problem?
An officer was shot to death. That is not, that is certainly not an appropriate sentence. That's outrageous. Let me be clear. We are doing everything we can to assist Minneapolis. We have a very aggressive U.S. attorney who's brought a number of RICO and Vicar cases.
Let me continue.
Extraordinarily successful.
I got a real short period of time here.
Sorry.
In regards to disrupting drug networks, why do you think there's so much fentanyl coming into the country?
Because it costs 10 cents to make and it can be sold for $30.
So Sheriff Mark Daniels from Cochise County, Arizona, sat right where you were at a few months ago, and under oath, he said, the reason there is such a drastic increase in fentanyl coming into the country is because on January 20th of 2021, open borders policies were announced by President Biden. Have you expressed concern about those open borders policies that have led to this rapid increase in the amount of fentanyl coming into our country?
I can't associate myself with the conclusion reached by the sheriff, although I can certainly commiserate with the concern.
So the sheriff is incorrect.
Look, the cartels in Mexico are bringing this, are causing this drug to be transmitted into the United States, and we were doing
Terrific.
everything we
Miss-
can to eliminate that incentive.
Yeah, you're not going to do it on doing that. Mr. Chairman, just so we're real clear here, this is the same answer we received from Secretary Mayorkas a couple months ago when he was in denial about a sheriff who lives, one of the most reputable sheriffs you'll find in the United States of America, sitting down there on that southern border. He sees it every day. He saw it working in 2020 because he told me when I was down there. And now he says it is not working, and it started January 20th of 2021. You can pretend that you're dealing with fentanyl. You're not, because the borders are wide open. Do you believe, I'm going to shift to combating gun violence. Do you believe that a prohibited person that acquires a gun illegally and disposes it in a dumpster where a criminal or an innocent child could gain access to it should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law?
This is no longer a hypothetical question. You're referring to a specific case, which is now in judicial determination before a court of law. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that case.
So for the record, Mr. Chairman, let's understand that the same prosecuting attorney who is now the special counsel gave a sweetheart deal to that person. And yes, you are correct. We're referring to the president's son. He got a sweetheart deal, and the judge was smart enough to smell a rat when she saw it, and she said, you guys go back to the drawing board. That same special counsel is in charge of this investigation. Isn't that correct, Mr. Chairman? Absolutely. I want to close real quickly with this. There was a World Naked Bike Ride in Madison, Wisconsin, just a couple months ago, and I sent you a letter 2 months ago asking if you had a problem with that because it exposed a 10-year-old girl by the race organizer, the bike organizers, to pedaling around Madison, Wisconsin naked. Do you think that's a problem? And why did you not answer our letter from 2 months ago?
I'm sorry, I'll have to ask the Office of Legislative Affairs to get back to you about this.
Does it typically take 2 months to be able to answer questions like
I don't
this?
know, it sounds like you're asking about a question about state and local law enforcement. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. I'll ask the Office of Legislative Affairs where that letter is.
State and local law enforcement would not act. We were hoping you would. It's obvious you're not. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Mr. Attorney General, for joining us and for your patience with this questioning. I'm honored to represent a diverse community in North Carolina. Wake County has worked to welcome people of all backgrounds, ethnicities, and religions. The growth and success of my district in the Research Triangle Park depends on our commitment to celebrating the many cultures that contribute to our community. Unfortunately, over the past few years, these very communities that have contributed so much to my state and my district have found themselves under attack. Jewish leaders in my district have received threats to themselves and their synagogues as recently as last month. HBCUs across our state have locked down in response to bomb threats. Asian Americans in North Carolina and throughout the country have found themselves facing slurs and threats spurred in large part by the racialized language about the COVID-19 pandemic. The Southern Poverty Law Center reported in late 2020 that the number of white nationalist groups grew 55% between 2017 and 2019, noting that the rise in hate-based attacks coincides with the growth of the white nationalist movement. And the Anti-Defamation League relatedly found that white supremacist propaganda incidents occurred over 14 times per day on average in 2020, with a total of 5,125 reported cases, nearly twice the number of cases reported in 2019, and the highest number the ADL has ever recorded. This dangerous trend has continued in the last few years and has recently included as active clubs have been increasing in their number and prominence. These active clubs started popping up in late 2020 and are a network of white nationalist groups that see themselves as fighters in training for an ongoing war against a system they claim is deliberately plotting against the white race. As Attorney General, I am deeply interested and concerned about the rise of these clubs, threats of violence, and actual violence, and wanted to know if you're familiar with these activities and what your department is doing to counteract them.
I'm not familiar with the specifics of those clubs, and I will certainly look into what the department's doing in that respect. Very soon after I came into the department, I saw the spike in hate crime threats that were being made and in actual acts of violence. I directed the department to develop a strategy for responding to that. 30 days later, that was pretty much coincident with Congress's passage of the COVID No Hate Act. And we have now fulfilled, I think, all of the obligations under that act. We have task forces set up to investigate and prosecute hate crimes, both as hate crimes and where they satisfy the requirements as domestic violent extremism or as domestic terrorism. We have brought dozens of cases against people who have made these threats, as well as, in particular, those who have attempted to carry them out. And as you know, we have a prosecution pending in Buffalo with respect to the horrendous killing of Black Americans in the Tops grocery store by an avowed white supremacist.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts in this regard. On a different subject with my last 45 seconds, North Carolina also saw the impact of cyber crimes with the Colonial Pipeline.
Yes.
And I'd like to know how your office is counteracting any cyber attacks and dealing with people who perpetrate them.
Yeah, so we are vigilant to the risk of these kind of cyber attacks. In that case, these were criminal gangs affiliated in Russia, resident in Russia. Fortunately, we had available intelligence from Section 702, which we were discussing a little bit earlier today. I have to say that's one of the principal sources of our ability to fight these kind of cyber attacks, whether they are criminal or whether they are launched by nation states, whether they are attempting to get a ransomware and create ransom, whether they're simply trying or also simply trying to exfiltrate our information, or whether they're trying to prevent our computers from working at all. The Justice Department has established a cyber task force for this purpose, a ransomware task force, and we are recently working on cryptocurrency in exactly the same way.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. We're going to try to move quickly.
Thank you. I yield back.
Attorney General, because we got votes and then we got
Yeah,
a
of course.
majority conference. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Attorney General, welcome. And my friend and colleague from Colorado outlined your biography, I thought, very well. But he left out 2 points that I'd like to mention. One is, not only did you lead the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombing case, but in that case, the death penalty was asked for and actually received, and Timothy McVeigh was executed. Not exactly a Democrat priority to seek the death penalty in cases, but you did so because of the rule of law. You did so because the facts and the law demanded that you did so, and you followed the facts and the law in that situation. The other issue I wanted, or example in your bio that I wanted to point out, is my understanding that in your conference room, you have a portrait of Elliot, demanded that the Department of Justice stay independent from the Nixon administration. He had the backbone to stand up to the President of the United States and make sure that the Department of Justice would not become the government's lawyer. You put that portrait there soon after you became Attorney General because it was a signal. It was a signal to the world. And for that reason, he resigned before January 20th when power was turned over. But Mr. Attorney General, you're unable to answer some questions here, but I'll answer them for you. Do you know what people would have said if you had asked for U.S. Attorney Weiss's resignation when you became Attorney General? I'm sorry, U.S. Attorney. Yeah, U.S. Attorney Weiss's resignation. They would have said that you were obstructing, that you were firing to slow walk this investigation and lose the leadership of that investigation. If you had made the same decision a year later because you were frustrated that the prosecution wasn't moving fast enough, they would have again said that you were interfering with the prosecution. If you, when U.S. Attorney Weiss decision out of investigation and put someone in who would have had to come up to speed on the investigation and wouldn't have allowed major decisions to be made until they came up to speed. So in 3 different opportunities where you could have acted, you would have been criticized either way. Whether you acted or did not act in that situation. Administration decided that the opportunity to make a decision
I appreciate your reference in your opening remarks, your written opening remarks, to the Department of Justice strongly supports efforts by Congress to promote competition in digital markets by passing legislation to prohibit certain anti-competitive practices by dominant online platforms. Facebook and Google are monopolies, and they have been, they spent $250 million, according to reports in the last Congress, to defeat those bills. And now we do nothing in this Congress to try to deal with that very serious issue. In fact, there are efforts, I'm told, over in the Senate, and I use the word effort and Senate very carefully in the same sentence. But they, S20, that money to the General Department of Justice Operations Fund to try to further cripple the efforts that are going on in court. The state attorney generals and the Antitrust Division and Federal Trade Commission are doing a great job jointly in trying to combat the scourge of these monopolies. My question to you is, will you ensure that the Antitrust Division is properly funded so it can continue this very serious effort at stopping these monopolies from harming our position in this area?
Yes, I absolutely will. And one of the first things I did in the first budget opportunity we had was to ask for more money for the Antitrust Division than had been given in quite a long time, and to ask for the fees that are paid for correctly rather.
And January 20th, 2021.
Mr.
With that, I recognize the gentlelady.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, since he mentioned a monopoly, could I also enter into the record this article about the MasterCard Visa duopoly by Proactive and their target of a bipartisan bill to reform this monopoly? Could I insert that into the record, please?
Yeah, without objection, unanimous consent accepted. Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland. St. Louis commitment to supporting civil rights and the rule of law, but I have concerns about whether the department under your leadership is doing the absolute most it possibly can to advance these goals. In the limited time I have, I want to share my concerns about department needs to take. Department's cases getting outside is you in courtrooms around the country, including St. Louis, prosecutors who ultimately report to level immigration and narcotics and firearm offenses. And under your watch, for the first time in nearly a decade, it's
with school personnel.
Direct.
School personnel, school administrators.
Throughout the
board members.
country is a priority for the federal government, for the United States Attorney's Office. That followed a letter on September 29th, 2021 from the National School Board Association to President Biden and emails from the National School Board Association Director Chip Slavin to the White House, in which the White House asked for specific threats. And one of the examples was Scott Smith. Subsequent to our hearing 2 years ago, 26 states left the National School Board Association, and Slavin resigned on November 23rd of 2021. Last week, Mr. Smith was pardoned by Governor Youngkin. Do you think opinion on what?
Not in a position to make.
Have you rescinded the memo that you issued in 2021?
What we're discussing.
Have you
occurs-
rescinded the memo? Yes or no?
What we're discussing here occurs.
Does the memo still exist? Is it still going? Yes or no? Has it been rescinded?
The memo was intended to have meetings within 30 days.
Has
The
it
thir-
been rescinded?
The 30 days have finished. Nothing has happened in more than a year and a half with respect to that
But it has
memo.
not been rescinded. Have you apologized? Yes or no?
I've testified 7 times since that original memo.
It's the first time
came
you're
out.
back here since we talked about it.
I'm sorry?
It's the first time you're back here in front of us. Have you apologized for putting that memo out that implicated Scott Smith as a domestic terrorist, something the governor of Virginia has now pardoned him from all of these accusations?